because to be able to raise a proper A, you have to like be at $1 million ARR or show kind of a repeatable sales model that you'll get there. So it's people just have less time. And it's also interesting, right? Because I've been a community builder my whole career. And now I'm actually telling founders to be like, yes, community is important, but if it doesn't, like, it has to really directly drive towards what are the business goals and be so closely connected, when in turn, community building is a long game. And so it's this like weird, like I'm struggling, like where I'm like, how do you balance it? But I'm like, but you also have to build a sustainable business, but build community. I don't know.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Hacking Open Source Business Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Yankovic, joined with co-host Avi Press once again. And today we're joined with our favorite person in the Bay Area now, Jana. Jana, how are you doing today?
I am so good, and it's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Now, Jana, you can be honest. Have you ever listened to any of the previous episodes that we've had?
I have not. Not.
Then this will be a surprise, so it's awesome. All right.
I know, and I didn't get any questions ahead of time. So what I mentioned is like I have lots of thoughts, lots of ideas. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
So it's on purpose. So I am wearing my special hat, my evil supervillain hat, because we start these recordings in these conversations with rapid fire mode, where I randomly decide somewhere between 11 and 237 different questions to ask you right off the bat that have absolutely nothing to do potentially with what we'll talk about towards the later half of this. But somewhere between those 11 and 237, we'll find out some really interesting stuff about Jana. All right. So
I'm glad I've had two cups of coffee already. So I am so ready for this.
Awesome. All right. Okay. Well, so sticking with the super evil villain theme, I know that you have just moved. So New York or San Francisco, what do you prefer? Like I'm going to go right for the core of it. Right for the core of it. You're in San Francisco now.
Are we in like a Twitter debate right now where it's like the New York versus Miami versus Austin?
We can start
the tech hub?
We can. You want us to start one? We could start one. So I'm guessing that it's San Francisco because that's where you are right now.
I grew up in Northern California. I started my career in 2008 in San Francisco, and this is just kind of where my heart is. So as much as I loved my time in New York, I was never really connected to the tech scene there because I was always working remotely for Hashi Corp. So when I closed my laptop, I would go to music, art, dinners. And so now as I'm getting more into investing, or actually I'm an investor full time, I just wanted to go back to the Bay Area.
Awesome. But you have a unique perspective because being in those two places, which are massively large cities, you probably know what restaurants we should go to. So what's your go-to restaurant in New York and go-to restaurant in San Francisco?
Oh my gosh.
See, this
I have
is tough.
I have a spreadsheet, and someone told me to open source it.
You should.
A detailed
I would start
spreadsheet with tabs in New York City because I'm an experienced person. So my three favorite restaurants are Minetta Tavern, Raoul's, and Le French Diner in the Lower East Side. And then in San Francisco, there's a taqueria on Valencia and 18th. That's a hole in the wall. That's probably some of the best burritos I've ever had. And then also Heirloom Cafe.
I love the hole in the walls.
Wait, sorry. What is that? What is the taco place called?
I don't know what it's called. All I know is it's on 18th.
Okay.
It's called like Taqueria something.
Okay.
But it's at 18th and Valencia. It's just on that corner there. And just you go there. But I've lived there for 10 years now again, and I don't know the name.
I'm gonna have to try it. I don't think I've been there.
Oh, see, we're learning new things. This is what this is all about: is learning new things, right? Okay, so when you're not working, you said you closed your laptop and you did other things. What are we most likely going to find Jana doing when she's not working?
What does Jana do? Jana just floats on a cloud of joy, and I ride bikes. I don't know. I really love art. I studied art history. I go to yoga. I really love live music. It might surprise people, but sometimes I'll go listen to dark techno in a basement at a place called Basement in Brooklyn. So I'm a multifaceted person.
Well, I'll just jump around the questions then, because why not just ask you? So if you're a music fan, what is the first concert you went to?
Oh, I was 13 or 14, and I saw NSYNC, and Cisco opened for them and sang the thong song. And I don't know if I should have seen that, but I still remember him. He had this dance move where he was driving a car made up of dancers, and like there were four wheels that were the dancers that were rolling, and so that was my first concert.
Wow, that is nowhere near my first concert, but that is cool. That is cool. Now, you have had a long career in various tech industry, but you've touched on open source as well. So is there a tool that you're using now that is kind of a go-to tool in the open source space, something you really like?
Yeah, I mean, I got really lucky. Again, I started my career in 2008 during like the great financial like crisis, recession, and the only industry that was hiring was really tech back then. And so I moved home, right? Like the Bay Area is home for me, and I got my first job, or like the first kind of open source tech company I worked at was a company called Engine Yard. And it's no longer around. It was a competitor to Heroku. It was actually a competitor to Amazon back in the day. We had our own colo. And that's really where I learned about open source. That's like, where I met Mitchell Hashimoto, the founder of Hashi Corp, because we sponsored him one summer to work on Vagrant. It was the height of the Ruby on Rails. And so I got to meet a lot of people in that community. And then I got to like, Engineer did so much for the community. So that's where I learned about like dev marketing, community building. I'm not a developer myself. I've just been able to just like build deep friendships. And I've always been kind of a person that loves people and able to bring people together. So I was able to kind of make a career in tech without being deeply technical myself.
So is there one tool though, one open source tool that you're using nowadays, like something interesting to share with us?
I mean, no, because
okay,
I'm not a developer.
Oh,
there's a lot of tools I'm evaluating as a potential investments, but not cool. Personally.
All right, fair enough.
I'm not opening up VS Code and.
Well, yeah, it's not just VS Code. That there's so many open source tools that you don't even know. Like, what browser are you using right now? It's probably open source, right? So a lot of different open source software out there. Maybe not. Bobby, what are you talking about? So going into that space, I know that you did a lot. Of live events. What was your first tech conference then?
That I organized?
Oh, no, that you went to, attend to. Like, you went there and you're like, wow, look at all these geeks. What's going on here? I don't know. Like, what was that first experience for you, and was it memorable?
Well, probably one of my favorites was in 2012 was UlConf in out of Dublin, Ireland. It was like in a castle organized by Paul Campbell, the founder of Tito. It was that one and a conference called Railsbury in Krakow, Poland.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It was held in like a train station. So I don't know, the first conferences I went to were like the more intimate ones at like cool venues. And they were more kind of like unconference style. And like those were always kind of ones I tried to emulate when I did events.
Those are always the fun ones, right? Because you just get to know people. It's just really low key. It's not run. So yeah, I like those too.
Yeah. But I was really surprised. Like, I don't know why after the pandemic, people brought back like large conferences. Like I almost thought people would kind of rethink the conference format. And it's like, no one wants to go to a 10,000 person conference with an expo hall. What people are really craving is like intimacy and deep connections. And I find those like 200 person events are way more kind of impactful than like you're running around a 10,000 person conference.
Oh. Well, so speaking of events, okay, I know that you have spoken at multiple events. Let's say you're going to do a keynote and they go, Jana, what walk-up music do you want to play as you walk up to the stage? What's the song?
I mean, I'm obsessed with LCD Sound System.
Okay.
Or Talking Heads. Or Odessa. I don't know. There's like one of those three bands, I would think.
Fair enough. We're going to put together a playlist. We're asking everybody this question. So we've got like 15 different answers, and they are all over the board. So
all over the board. Yeah.
All over the board. Well, so you have survived rapid fire mode. So it wasn't that bad. This is
great. I love it.
It wasn't that bad.
It's such an intimate way to get to know people.
Well, yeah. So we want to make the connection early on. We want people to get to know you as they listen, and then we could talk about some of these other interesting things. Now, One of the interesting things, you've said you started your career in 2008, and you've started at several startups. In fact, if I recall, you've had like 6 different startups in the tech space that you've worked with, correct?
Yeah. Yes, I've done 6 early stage startups. I'm older than I look. It's been 15 years now of startups. Of course, some that didn't go anywhere, and you learned so much from those, and then and a few that had pretty successful outcomes.
Well, the big successful one was Hashi, and that's the one that I know is really that big unicorn. Not to diminish the other ones, but Hashi definitely is one that I know is near and dear to your heart. And you were employee number 10 there. At a startup
so
that
cool.
size, when you're that small, how scrappy did you have to be early on?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, Hashi Corp is it's special. It's like the best boyfriend I've ever had. And it's one that I will forever remember fondly, but at some point you're like, it's time for me to go. I did all I could here. Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mentor a lot of people entering tech, navigating tech, kind of, figuring out career changes. And there's just people that are just great at different phases, right? People that are just like, just know that they are a person that like is great at like a 0 to 50, 0 to 100, or someone that just kind of loves kind of like a later stage company. I am someone that like loves chaos and the unknown. Again, I like 4 of the startups I worked at were 10 employees. I mean, I started at New Relic when we were about 100, but Hash Corp was 10, and a few other ones. And so I love the early days, right? Because all you have this blank canvas, and you get to really like you learn the playbooks from past, or you see what other companies have done, but you get to apply the playbooks like to your company and to your audience. So I've always been an early stage person, because you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like the first 5 years of Hashi Corp, I was working 80 hours a week, and not because someone was telling me, because I just loved it. I loved the employees. I loved our community. Like we saw and it's so funny because people are like, okay, I want to find a winner, right? Like one day I want to get rich working at a startup. And it's like, that wasn't our objective at HashiCorp, right? Like I didn't know how, like none of us knew, right, that HashiCorp would one day IPO. Like even at like, I was part of a small team that was let in early to prepare the company to go public. But like even a month before the IPO, employees didn't know, right? So nothing's like a sure thing. But what we did know early days is that like we figured out kind of like what the market was missing, and we were able to build tools that was really resonating with people. And so that was exciting, right? To build community for people that like really saw value and wanted to be a part of the mission.
I want to dig into that a little bit, because I think that's, for a lot of really early stage companies, kind of knowing when you've found that product that is really resonating with people is like not really the most straightforward thing to answer. And I feel like HashiCorp is a really interesting, track on this, especially when you look at things like Terraform, which are now like just so dominant, but it really seemed very unobvious that it was going to succeed. At least like probably for a really long time of it being built.
Yeah.
So like, can you talk a little bit about how, how are you kind of evaluating, like, is this really working like we think it is? Like you kind of have that secret at the very beginning, but at some point you get more and more sure about it, I guess.
Yeah, it's something I talk to founders a lot about. Because when we first launched like open source Terraform, our downloads were abysmal. Like it was just like, if you see the first 2 years, it didn't have much traction. And I think that surprises people, because people always look at a company at where it is today, right? I mean, I think the year before I watched like Dave McJannet, the CEO's keynote, and he said that all of the HashiCorp tools were downloaded 250 million times. And that's just kind of like a wild number to think about. But with Terraform, we actually scrapped the first version of it. So what we did really early on, and what I tell a lot of founders, is build out a really great kind of user feedback program. So we knew the first 1,000 people in our community by name. We knew them intimately, right? So there's a few things. There were people that were contributing, right? There were those early adopters that were already kind of talking excited. There were kind of like the potential folks that we were reaching out to just to have like open dialogue feedback. So we had a pretty good kind of feedback loop that we were getting feedback. So the first version of Terraform, we actually scrapped and rebuilt it. And I think that like surprises people. But yeah, you then start to see kind of, so that was one with Terraform, was that like deep connections with those early community members, anyone that even mentioned or had a question, we would do calls, build relationships with. And then we had to also educate a whole market on infrastructure as code, right? So when we launched Terraform, no one actually knew what infrastructure as code was. So Mitchell and Armand for 2 years were just giving basic talks on that like subject. So that's also something interesting, right? If you're defining a new category and changing a way that a developer workflow and introducing a new tool, there's like, I always believe the first pillar of community building is education.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think like there's a lot of companies very early on that, think, whether correctly or incorrectly, that they're like, establishing a completely new thing. And it just takes a lot of, just real conviction in it that it's going to work. Yeah. And it's really tough to like really, I don't know, whether you're going out to raise a Series A or whether you are, going to double down on the expansion strategy of it, to know that, yeah, we've really found that right thing. But in open source, it's even doubly hard because you're not getting paid right away for it.
I love the double. Is doubly? Did we just make up a word? Because I'm here for it.
Yeah, I don't know. But I guess I'm curious how your team was thinking about like kind of that trade-off between the business growth really early on and just the fact that this new product is being adopted and people are seeing infrastructure.
I have so much empathy for founders, just in general, right? I've never had the guts to start my own thing. I've always been really like enjoyed supporting founders, but especially now. Right, as the markets have changed, and it's really cool, right? Because now I'm on the investment side, so now I evaluate companies through the lens of, can this one day be a big business? Kind of like, do they have product market fit, right? What's their like monetization strategy at some point? When Hashi Corp, when we raised our A, we asked investors to give us 2 years. So back in the day, we weren't even thinking about monetization. So we're like, we want to first completely dominate in the open source and get that open source traction. And you see the change, right? So first you're just like, you're doing a lot of outbound, right? You're writing content, you're going to meetups, you're speaking, you're doing one-on-one stuff. And at some point you feel this like tipping point where all of a sudden you see that like that hockey stick curve. And then as other people are talking about you and other people are sharing, and that's when you, right? Like once you get that kind of like peer-to-peer validation and peer-to-peer sharing, that's when you really see kind of this tractions take off. But again, we asked our investors to give us 2 years before we even started to think about monetization. And it's kind of tough now, right? Because to be able to raise a proper A, you have to like be at $1 million ARR or show kind of a repeatable sales model that you'll get there. So it's people just have less time. And it's also interesting, right? Because I've been a community builder my whole career. And now I'm actually telling founders to be like, yes, community is important, but if it doesn't, like, it has to really directly drive towards what are the business goals and be so closely connected when in turn, community building is a long game. And so it's this like weird, like I'm struggling, like where I'm like, how do you balance it? But I'm like, but you also have to build a sustainable business, but build community. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a tough one because, this is not just an economic change. I mean, this has been happening the last few years, but I think the current economy, as you had pointed out, really is making it more difficult to give that leeway to say, okay, yeah, take the 2 years, take the, the time to build, the traction and then figure out monetization later. But I do know, even in the last like 3-4 years, I know of a lot of startups who have gotten funding and it's like, we really don't know how we're going to make money. We just are going to go get millions of people. And then there's going to be this giant question mark. And eventually we'll just have this massive exit at the end. It's a weird environment. Yeah. It's a weird environment though. Right. And I think a lot has changed over this time. And it's interesting that you advise that, now it's really about the business model. So when you're talking to people, you've got kind of a dual role as investor and advisor. Are there things that you're telling the people you're advising right now about how to kind of weather the current economic, storm or get to that Series A? Are there certain things that are key?
Yeah, I actually want to go back to kind of just talking about open source model and open core model in general. Just go back to your like original point. I think I almost sometimes feel like companies and founders over rotate so much where it's like open source and open core is like the model that to build a business now. And I almost wonder, like, I sometimes just hear founders of like, oh, I'm just going to open source this to get traction. And I almost feel like sometimes we forgot that the point of what open source kind of means, like the ethos around open source and then why you open source. So that's kind of one point, which I'd love to hear your opinions. And two, I almost now feel that like they're giving everything for free, right? I talked to this company, right, that had a massive adoption in the open source and then gave the project to the CNCF and they don't have a monetization strategy. So then I'm like, well, like what's the business now, right? But we're like, well, we want to prove to the community that we believe in open source, but then it's like, but then you have nothing to sell.
Yeah, I think that is a really common thing. Unfortunately, people have taken open source and the success of many companies, whether it's Hashi or other companies that have done this, and they've just said, we want to copy that. And so slapping open in front of something and be like, oh, open source, yay! They think that if they build it, the money will eventually come, right? And it's something that I've seen over and over again. And honestly, the tech graveyard is filled with companies that have followed that kind of model, unfortunately, because they haven't thought about business. And when I talk to founders and executives, I try to always focus on the why. Why are you doing this? What's the purpose? What's your goal? If your goal is to change the world, then, hey, as a not-for-profit, as a foundation-driven project, maybe that's the goal, right? But that's not a business. If your goal is to have a big exit, it's to, be financially secure, it's to, elevate the level of standard of living for your employees, all of those great things, but they're all different goals, and how you go about achieving them are vastly different. And yeah, you definitely have to think through that model. Avi, as a founder, what do you think?
You're laughing. You've been smiling the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tempting to have this thinking of, well, yeah, first I need to get lots of adoption, and then I'll worry about these things later because so much will happen between there and now. I can't possibly actually predict, how this is going to play out. There's also just, a lot of the survivorship bias thing too. Like a lot of very successful companies did actually just fall into their business model and didn't really think about it up front. And so it's like, well, if that worked for them, it might work for me also. I would be very interested if we had, like, I don't know if the data set exists, for how intentional was this company about their business model? How many times did they pivot that business model over time? And what does that look like when it comes to the success rate of it? But I think that in general, being very intentional when building a business is just generally a good recipe because it makes you think more deeply about what you're doing. And like, the thing that comes to mind with that is like the YC application is very long, but it's also something that they say is like, well, this is just good for you to think through anyway. And like, it's a fairly reasonable justification that like, yeah, you should do this even if you're not applying to YC when you're starting a business because it makes you think through this stuff. So that's not very conclusive to the question, but it's just like meandering thoughts about it that like, it's not, I think being intentional is just generally good. Is it a requirement for success? Probably not, but should you do it? Yes.
I got into a LinkedIn debate. It was like 11 p.m. at night. And I'm like, why am I checking LinkedIn at 11 p.m. at night? But someone was arguing that you should think about your monetization strategy from the beginning. And I was just saying, I'm like, okay, that's so easy in hindsight, right? Like I was saying, so the biggest competitors to Hashi Corp was Hashi Corp's own open source projects, right? Like our biggest competitor to Terraform Enterprise was Terraform. Our biggest competitor to Vault Enterprise was Vault, right? And so then he was like, well, then you guys weren't thoughtful about how you thought about like monetization strategy. And I was like, well, I mean, we had a $15 billion exit. So it's not like we messed up, but I'm just saying, right. It's like, for people that have never built companies and are in it, right. When you're just like, there's so much momentum and pressure and like, cause when you have an open source project and like a platform or some type of like paid version, like you're building two separate I don't know. There's so much to think about, but like,
yeah. I mean, I think, one of the interesting things that you mentioned there was, the point about, oh yeah, it's the hindsight, right? And there's so much hindsight in this. It's not funny where people are always second guessing and, oh yeah, if you would have just done this, you would have been better off. But I think one of the critical things that people miss on the open source side is 1 million users does not mean 1 million customers, right? 1 million users means potentially, let's say, I don't know, 10,000 customers or 1,000 customers, who knows how many. Because if you are intentional or you do think about how you're going to monetize this or commercialize this in the future, what you're going to do is find the niche of people who are willing to pay. And almost every open source company that I've worked with, that I've talked with, that I've, known, their competition is always themselves, right? Because, that's just the way that open source is. There's, like I said, 1 million people, 900,000 will use your free version. You have to focus on the ones that will pay and be very specific on what they'll pay for. And that's always a trick, right? Is what are those features? What should be reserved? What shouldn't be? And, there are lots of answers, but it requires some research and some thought and talking to people. I know like a lot of technical people hate to talk with folks. People out there, talk with folks. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Talk with your users, figure this out. Talk with potential, folks out there, because it's a big miss.
That's such a great point. Yeah. Again, it goes back to my original, from the early days, set up a proper user feedback program.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And know those first 200, 300 people intimately.
Was there anything in that, in the way that you constructed that feedback program, were there specific design choices that were particularly impactful? Were there tools that were in use that were really effective? Were there, I don't know, strategies, et cetera, that stand out to you?
You mean apart from a spreadsheet?
Yes.
Spreadsheets are awesome.
Yeah. So it's really I still think about Engine Yard's kind of forever my example of a company that should have made it, a company that had just all the things, right? Incredible, love in the community, just understood developer marketing, was pretty early, right? We launched before Heroku, but the problem that we had was, we can close New Relic for $100,000 a month. They're asking for this specific feature. So engineering would spend four months on building that feature for that one customer. GitHub, right, is wanting to move off. By the way, Engineering had all the largest Ruby on Rails sites hosted on us: Bleacher Report, Groupon, GitHub, New Relic. It was wild. And so the problem by the end, right, is just we had this product that had all these features, right, that wasn't opinionated, to be able to close these one-off customers, right? Versus Heroku it was all about Git deploy, right? They were very kind of opinionated on this is how developers are going to deploy applications. And that doesn't mean that they didn't listen, right? And make sure kind of that the platform still fit their needs and stuff, but they at least had a very strong opinion of this is the way it should be done. And so I think when I think about user feedback program, I wouldn't okay, there's just a new junior dev learning how to code, and then they say something, then that's a feed. You start to notice patterns, right? So you start to identify who are those kind of key users, right? If you and key personas, and then if you're 5 to 6 people have repeated a similar thing, then you start to notice the trends. So that's kind of what Jira, Asana, right? There's the other tools out there that you can kind of capture, right? And capture feedback and organizing. You're okay, hey, we heard 10 people had this kind of ask and request. That's maybe something we should explore.
Were you doing anything in particular to encourage that feedback, or were you just getting a lot of it anyway?
Yeah, I think that's the whole beauty of building community, and the one of the reasons you build community is to open up those channels for valuable feedback. And so, right, so it's doing things appreciating them, showcasing them, sending, I remember, even now I have to bring it back, but I do these Cafe Yana video series. And so I send everyone a little thank you note. I send everyone a little thank you note, just handwritten thank you note after. So a little early. I think what's really nice in the early days, and I think you don't have to think about scale yet. So a lot of the things you do can still be very personal and one-off, and a handwritten note and a hand-curated little gift box, or a free ticket to a conference. Like we did I launched these, it was our core contributor gifts. And so they were these like curated boxes where we did like, because we only, let's say we had like 15 contributors to Terraform. So there were only 15 of those t-shirts ever designed. Like I put in there like a little, like they were called golden tickets. It was like the Willy Wonka golden ticket, where it was free tickets to our user conference, and a handwritten note by Mitchell and Armand, and a few other little things in there that people like really appreciated. And then we would spot those t-shirts out in the wild, and then people would be like, well, how do I get those? It's like, well, it's by contributing. And then other people were like, well, now I want like the console one or the Nomad one, right? So it kind of created this like little fun game. So it's little things like that. Early access to things. Because again, right, I think at the end of the day, this isn't easy, right? And people really appreciate learning from each other and feeling like they're connected to something.
Nice. Yeah, those connections are super important. A lot of what people overlook is the relationship factor and building the relationships with not only your user base, but other people in the community, other companies. There's a lot of goodwill that you can do in there. But what's really
industry is small, right? The industry is small, so it's also like Matt, like you and I met, right? We were put on a panel together and connected and stayed friends, right? I didn't think I would get something from you, right? But it's like, but hey, this is a cool person. I'd love to stay in touch, and I think that's always how I've kind of approached this the career is just like be good to people, connect people, be helpful, right? The industry is smaller than you realize, and so like even when you like at Hashi Corp, right? It's like we never treated our community as leads, right? We never were like, okay, like we tried to never be transactional. Like I still think about that first Hashi Conf we did. We had about 350 people there. And if we would have just been like, okay, leads and what's the ROI out of that? And it's like, okay, net loss, we spent about $85,000 and we didn't actually, so it's like that, if we would have just 4 months later looked at, we would have said that was like a not good return on our investment. But those 350 people, because we just treated them as friends and only emailed them when it was like, hey, here's a great update, or here's some great like resources. 7 years later, I cannot tell you what happened with those 350 people. They became our top users, top customers, right? Capital One was one of the first people to talk on stage of how they were using Vault in production. 4 years later, it was a $15 million a year deal. Those folks became employees, ambassadors. So it's just like, if you treat people well and realize that we're all humans and like with empathy, it goes a long way.
Now, Jana, you wear multiple hats right now, and you mentioned a couple of things that I want to dig into. Obviously, investor, advisor, community advocate, right? So all three. But you mentioned some key words, and I wear multiple hats as well. So I'm going to put on my other hat, which is all about
I can't wait.
The ROI, and I'm going to put on the metrics hat here. So I've got my metrics hat on. So from your three hats of advisor, investor, and community advocate, when we talk about some of these activities, how do you measure some of them, and how do you prove the value? I mean, when a founder believes in it and they see the acceleration happen, that's one thing. But in a lot of companies, it's difficult to get started, and especially when maybe you're not hitting your revenue targets, or you mentioned you want to get that 1 million in ARR before you can get your Series A. Maybe you're not hitting the 1 million in ARR, but you're doing the community activities. You've got 1 million users, but no paying customers. So how do you show some of the value there? How do you show the ROI on some of the metrics? What do you look for? It's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know. It's such a we're always, and especially now more than ever, right? If you're putting any type of budget towards like community and DevRel programs, like what is the ROI? It's such a tough one, right? It's like we're always trying to answer that. And right, there's metrics like the amount of activities, right? You can measure DevRel by like, okay, hey, this DevRel person wrote this many blog posts a week and spoke and respond to this many GitHub issues and Twitter, right? So it's like, that's one. And then there's also kind of other metrics, okay, growth of like followers on Twitch and YouTube and your social media. Like at Hashi Corp, kind of we at the end had a really large kind of DevRel community team, and kind of like our North Star was like the amount of traffic that we drove to our Learn platform, because it was self-serve. And so that to us was important, right? The amount of people that were going and learning about our stuff was without us. Because right, early days at Hashi Corp, we were teaching trainings at all of our conferences. We were doing all those trainings, right? So imagine having an engineer and a DevRel person for a full day teaching 15 people. That doesn't scale. So that was kind of like the overall DevRel metric at HashiCorp. And then of course, each team had its own specific like number of like tracking core contributor sentiment over time, tracking like ambassador engagement over time, tracking like Slack engagement or GitHub discussion. So there's various ways you can kind of look at like the health of the business. But it's a combination. And I always think like community is still part of kind of like your go-to-market and your marketing. So it's all of these touch points that help you convert potentially, right? Convert a person to a paying customer. So they attend a webinar, they get touched in some way, right? Through sales or DevRel. So it's all of it works in tandem.
Measuring contributor sentiment is a really interesting one that I don't think I've heard before. How just by like surveys, or what were you doing to?
There's like survey. I mean, for us, right? It's if there are people that are contributing, right, and then had like that's great. I mean, that's one person that we are not paying, and that's someone that intimately understands the project, the code, the space, and so it's like. So you want to treat those people well. And so for us, right, we did core contributor program every year. So every year we kind of celebrated the code and we would send them. And so for one thing that we tracked was continuing, right? Is this person continuing to contribute over time? And then like, and if they haven't, right, is there like, can we figure out what happened, why, circumstances, and how can we kind of bring them back?
Got it.
So let's get back to my hat, because I put it on and I don't want to take my headphones off yet to switch hats again. And when we talk about metrics, because, sentiment's in metric, but I'm interested from an investor perspective. As you are evaluating investments, especially now, I know that there are companies out there, startups, people who are potentially looking to, take what they've developed and look at a commercialization strategy. Are there certain metrics that you're looking for, or indicators that would kind of like help you evaluate them for a potential investment?
Yeah, I'm so new to the investment side. It was kind of wild. I don't know if you both thought it's so cool to like think about your career. And for me, I've always been like an early stage builder. Like I love startups. And I kind of just fell into investment. I'm really I met my two partners. I work at TQ Ventures, and so I was making angel investments. So after Hashi Corp, I made about 15 angel investments, kind of mostly dev tool, infra, open source space. And when I met the partners, they gave me kind of this like part-time, and they're like, and I realized I knew actually nothing about like how to evaluate businesses. I was like, this looks cool. I really just like the founder. Oh my God, they have, 10,000 GitHub stars. This seems great. And I was just like, I have no idea how to actually evaluate a business. And Avi, you run one, so I'm sure you know more than I do. But yeah, early stage, right? There's just kind of, you look at the founders. So there's like three, right? So it's like, you look at the founders, right? Kind of what is their background? Is this like a problem space that they've just been like Mitchell, he has thought about infrastructure automation since he was in college, right? Like he eats, breathes, and sleeps this thing. And so you can feel kind of this passion, right? Versus is a founder, this is just kind of an idea they just kind of like happened upon, and they're just doing it, right? And then also kind of so a lot about the founder, kind of what is their ability to hire, what is their ability to kind of like tell the story, inspire people. So there's like the founder piece, then there's the kind of product, right? And so we do a lot of like due diligence. So is this a really interesting space? Is this like a nice to have or a must have, right? Are they defining a new category, or so right, you do a bunch of evaluation around the product. And then there's like the business side of things, right? Like how big could this potentially business be, right? What is their ability to build a moat? Are there like a bunch of other right? Are they just kind of building a competitor to Vault, right? Or is this kind of a new way to like do like secret storage management and like a new so there's kind of those for early stage, and then later stage. Like the one thing I didn't understand was the partners are having me read understand P&L statements. Like I'm right now reading Warren Buffett's book on how to understand like profit and loss. And then the partners are like, hey, Jana, let's pull up like Microsoft's like financials and let's go through. And I'm like, why are they having me look at like public companies? And it's like, oh, because kind of for like, once companies have some like revenue, you can like start to look of like, okay, like what is their like LTV and what is their average like customer so you can start to kind of look at like, is this a healthy business, right? Does it take them 6 to 8 months to like get a return on a customer, or is it 20 months, right? So it's been kind of cool. Again, I've only been doing this 2 months, and I'm so grateful for my partners being like, just like, they're both like investment nerds, right? Like one of the partners used to run a hedge fund, and he's just sitting here explaining to me like cap tables and terms. So I feel lucky. So again, I'm new, I can't say, but this is what I've learned so far.
Cool.
What stage are you investing at typically right now?
Yeah, so we raised our third fund. So we have 500 million. So we have like an early fund where we do pre-seed, seed, and Series A, and then we have a growth fund, mostly B. And then we also, like all of our LPs, we can like, if we need to in a week, we could put together like 100 million SPV. So we have, it's really nice because again, like I'm applying community building to this, where I'm like, oh, this is a long game. If we meet a great founder and they just raise their seed, well, let's just be as helpful as possible. And then maybe we can invest in their A.
Got it. So maybe, I guess I'll focus this question in on kind of the early stage investments for people who have kind of like, you know, a successful open source project just in isolation of the open source, and they're wanting to turn that into a business. I imagine there's kind of a lot of people pitching you that have that kind of situation. What are things that you are seeing a lot of that, you know, oh, if you could just improve this, that would really, you know, improve outcomes? Like, what would be your advice to a lot of those kinds of developers that are trying to turn that open source project into a business?
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool that I have like my builder marketing community hat, because I want all the founders to succeed. So for example, if I'm looking at a founder that has open source traction, I still am like, hey, what is like, are you like, what's your go-to-market strategy? What's your community strategy? How are you messaging this? What's the story that you're telling? And then, right, like, have you spoken to kind of like the community members? Like, what are they willing to pay? Right. Like I also then it's like, you kind of have to like start thinking about it as like, okay, setting it up as like a business, right? With all like the different facets of like how to run a successful, or like what a business needs to be from like, because I think if you have an open source project, right, you can just be one person, right, that's maintaining it, that's updating the docs, that's talking. But I think when you're doing the transition from kind of like one or two people to like, okay, now I want to kind of build a business around this, then you have to kind of start thinking about like brand and messaging, and okay, what are the first few hires you would have, and kind of what is like what if you're talking to your community members, what are they saying? Like, do they use this in production? Is this, again, this goes back to the like, oh, is this like a nice feature, or is this something that they would really pay for, and this could be like a critical part of their workflow? And then start thinking about kind of like, what else is out there? Are there competing products out there? And then how would you kind of build a paid version, right? Well, what does that look like?
Got it. So then let's take one step forward then. So now, you know, for the companies that have raised their seed rounds, they're kind of progressing towards that Series A. I'm curious how, because a lot of investors I've talked to have kind of different opinions on this right now. It's a little tough with the economy being in such a volatile situation right now. What do you recommend that seed stage companies are focusing on when it comes to things like metrics? Are you kind of in the camp of like just revenues, it's revenue, or do you have kind of more specific?
It shifted so fast.
Yeah.
It changed so fast. From even 6 months ago, you could still raise with just a deck and with just like great open source traction, right? You could be like, hey, we doubled in the number of open source, number of like GitHub stars, or we like, you know, we drive this much traffic to our website. Like the metrics changed, right? And again, I'm super new to investing, so I only have kind of like the lens from my firm. But yeah, it must be tough, right, as a founder going to raise, because I think every firm is saying something a little bit different. But I do think overall, revenue, right, or potential to revenue, or how you're going to monetize is kind of the big question everyone's asking, more than kind of like the amount of like open source adoption you have. I think consider, right? So you probably won't be able to, it's harder to raise A's now. So be open to things like a safe, or letting VCs maybe buy like secondary. So just kind of be open to kind of different, maybe just a flat round. Is like, I also think there's nothing wrong with like a flat round, right? Like I don't know. I think there's just sometimes like the Silicon Valley of like, okay, you have to like, this is the valuation now at this A. But again, right, it's just like you just need cash, right? Like, and also just
I like to remind people Google once did a down round. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Google got through it. Like
and
you can too.
And you just need cash, right? Whether it's like you're like, okay, we're feeling that we have the traction. We just need a bit of extra cash, right, to get us over there. So it's okay to do like a seed plus, or a secondary. So don't get caught too much on the valuation right now, and also like dilution, right? Because like dilution at a seed isn't that much in like the long tail. So that's kind of my observation and things I've been telling founders.
Got it. Matt, do you have a follow-up to that, or?
No, I don't have a follow-up to that specifically. If you did, feel free.
No. Go ahead.
All right. So we are quickly approaching, our time here, and Jana, I want to thank you, but I do have one question.
That went by so fast. This was great.
I know. I do have one more question that I wanted to ask you. So, like we've said, you've had a wonderful career and a lot of different experiences. What do you wish you could tell your younger version of yourself way back when you started, when you got out of college? If there was one piece of advice you could tell yourself, what would it be?
That you're going to be okay, right? Like, I think I don't know. I was just so lost as a kid. Like, I wasn't the smartest kid in the room. Like, I've just, I graduated with college debt in 2008, and I was like, what job am I going to find? But I feel like I always made decisions based on, not financial, but based on, I really like this problem. I really like this company and this team. And so I feel like that's really served me right, is just, choosing based on, and even like this pivot, right? Like I could have joined any incredible company as like a head of community. Like I was getting DMs from founders, and instead I decided to go into venture, and I'm starting from the beginning, and I love it. I wake up every morning and I'm literally reading, I'm taking accounting classes. I'm just, and I wake up so inspired, right? So it's like, I did this kind of career pivot, but I'm so happy I did. Cause it's like, for me, I'm like, I get to work with great people. I get to learn. And so that's always how I've made career decisions. So I would tell my younger self, you're going to be okay.
Awesome. Well, Jana, thank you for hanging out with us today, telling us a little bit about what you've been doing lately and what you did before, and giving us all kinds of awesome tips on concerts we should definitely see in the future, and other things. We do appreciate you coming in.
Yeah. Thank you both.
All right. Everybody, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on all the socials out there. We do appreciate it. All right. Till next time. See you later.